Hello and welcome back to the Road to Emmaus journey. Today we're reaching the point where we're in First Peter chapter 5. And as we've been working through the book of First Peter, the author, Peter, has talked a lot about suffering. And he turns now suffering once again to a real practical point when we get to chapter 5. I love First Peter 5. I love what it talks about elders, and there's so many other things in there that really captures my attention. But just in the last several months, my reading through First Peter 4 and 5, some things have really stood out to me that I wanted to share with you today. So 5 is really set up by the end of 4. In chapter 4, verse 12, it says, "Beloved, don't be surprised at fiery trials when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange had happened." And it goes on to talk about that. Verse 17, it picks up, "For it is time for judgment to begin in the household of God, and if it begins with us, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God?" In verse 19, "Therefore, let those who suffer according to God's will entrust their souls to a faithful Creator while doing good." 5:1 says, "So I exhort the elders among you." So it's in this context of suffering. Don't be surprised by the suffering. It's going to happen. In fact, there's a testing and a refining that comes of it, and it's going to start in the house of God. And while we're starting in the house of God, let's talk about the leadership. And so, really, 5 starts it talking about the leadership, and then it moves into kind of all believers as it goes. And then it kind of comes back to the persecution thing. But it really struck me that as we're talking about judgment in the house of God and walking steadily in this testing, that it starts with the leadership of the church. And that's something that really stood out to me as we went through the passage. I'll come back to that in just a second. But there's a couple of just general observations that I see in chapter 5 while we're there. One of them is just the humility of Peter. In verse 1, it says, "So I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as partaker in the glory to be revealed." So Peter was there on the mountain with James and John when Jesus was transfigured and they saw his glory. He was there at the resurrection. Jesus appeared to him specifically after the resurrection. And Peter was Peter and Paul were like the main dudes in the church. So here Peter is writing near the end of his life, and he's like, guys, I'm just one of you guys. I'm just another elder in the church, as he's writing to this collection of local churches. I love his humility. And then as he goes on, he puts that in context. In verse 4, after it finishes talking about the elders, he says, "When the chief shepherd appears, you'll receive an unfading crown of glory." And that puts it in perspective. That word for chief shepherd is tied in with that word elder. The word used here for elder or shepherd of the flock and chief shepherd are the same word that we get our word pastor or shepherd from. And in verse 4, it is the chief shepherd or the lead pastor when he comes. Christ is our lead pastor, which is important for us, particularly in leadership, to know that we don't have a lead pastor in our church per se. It's really Jesus Christ that's our lead pastor, and we, the pastors and elders, follow in his path. And then just verses 6 and 7, which I learned separate from 7 from 6, casting all your cares on him, your anxieties, because he cares for you, is really tied into this idea of humble yourself before the mighty hand of God. In a proper time, he'll exalt you. Casting all your cares on him. So as you're humbling yourself before God, you've got these cares, cast them on him, because he cares for you while you're waiting for him to lift you up. So those are a couple of observations. Back to the elders. And this is what I really want to leave you with, and maybe even just ask for your prayers. Pray for the leadership of your church. At our church, it's the pastors and elders and deacons and staff. Pray for them. Pray for a couple of things as you read through verses 1 through 5 there. Pray for a humility regardless of the position of prominence. Because we tend to see those that are in front, and we kind of put them up on a pedestal sometimes, and we just pray for a humility that comes with that, because that's a struggle, I think, often with leadership. Pray for a willingness to serve among our leaders, that we would serve, that your leaders would serve with a willing heart. Pray that they would serve eagerly, that they would not get weary and tired and frustrated and even overwhelmed, but there would be an eagerness that really can come from the Spirit of God only. And then like Peter and like our Lord, that the elders would be and the leaders of the church would be examples to the flock, that not only would our preaching be accurate, which is important, but that our lifestyles would reflect our preaching, not not do as I say, but do as I do. That is, as your leaders are living their lives, that you see the truth of the gospel lived out in their lives. So there are a couple things to pray for the leaders of your church: humility, a willingness to serve, eagerness to serve, and that they be examples for the flock. So this is the Road to Emmaus journey. Thanks for joining me for just a few minutes here in 1 Peter 5.